what the Gemara is discussing, we said if you blew 9 sounds of the shofar, as we said, the Torah says there were truah 3 times regarding Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur of Yovel, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur of Yovel, and we learn out that there has to be 3 truot. You have to have 3 crying sounds, and each crying sound has to be preceded by a tekiah and followed by a tekiah. Tekiah to a tekiah, tekiah to a tekiah, tekiah to a tekiah. That's the biblical obligation of the shofar. But because we don't know what is the truah, is it truah a truah what we call shvarim 2 2 2, or is it truah a combination of a shvarim truah? So we do all 3 different types. We do tekiah shvarim truah 3 times, tekiah shvarim truah 3 times, tekiah shvarim truah 3 times. Right? That's because we have a question: what is the right truah? So therefore, for us to know that you fulfill the biblical obligation, if you do 30 sounds, which is Kia Shvarim Trua Tekiah is 4 sounds. Kia Shvarim Trua Tekiah 3 times, 12. 3 times Kia Shvarim Kia Shvarim Tekiah is 9, and another Kia Trua Tekiah 3 times, another 9. So that's a total of 30. That's the minimum sounds you need to blow in order to know that you fulfill the mitzvah min Torah of shofar. But the Gemara is talking about the biblical the mitzvah min Torah. 9 sounds. You blow 9 sounds. I mean, 9 sounds means 3 truot preceded, each one preceded by a tekiah and followed by a tekiah. And Rabbi Yochanan said a very big chidush. His big chidush was that even though you blew the 9 sounds over 9 hours, every hour 1 sound, right, Mr. Haber? 1 sound. At 8 o'clock in the morning, you blew a tekiah. 9 o'clock, you blew a truah. 10 o'clock, you brought a tekiah. 11, and then you did it again. Repeated that 3 times. Over 9 hours, you get your yotzeh. You fulfill your mitzvah, even though there's a major interruption between the tekiah and the truah and the tekiah. Now the Chavetz Chaim writes not that you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to make such an interruption. You're not supposed to blow it over 9 hours. But here we're talking about after the fact. That's what he did. That's the Gemara, and obviously you can learn out from this case other types of interruptions that will not be counted, that will not invalidate the blowing of the shofar. So that's what we said. So the Gemara questioned Rabbi Yochanan's statement. The Gemara had said yesterday, "Mi Amar Rabbi Yochanan Hachi." Did Rabbi Yochanan say such a thing? Around 34b1. Did Rabbi Yochanan say such a thing? That if you went ahead and you had such delay between each sound of the shofar, you yotzei. V'omer Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yotzadok. Rabbi Yochanan said, "Name Shimon ben Yotzadok that b'Halel u'Megillah, if you're reading the Halel on Yom Tov, or you're reading or Hanukkah, or Megillah, you're reading Megillat Esther, im sha'a kedei ligma et kula. If you delayed, right, Mr. Haber, he stopped in the middle, and he delayed the amount of time that it would take to read the whole Megillah. Let's say you were reading the Megillah, you were middle of the 3rd chapter, 3rd parak of Megillat Esther, and then you stopped. You couldn't read it anymore. And now you couldn't read it anymore, and they need someone else to take over. The next person that they could get to take over it takes a certain amount of time to get him to come to the shul. Everybody's in the shul and everyone's waiting for him to come. So how much time would have taken for that first guy to read the whole Megillah from beginning to end? Let's say Megillah reading takes 40 minutes. 40. If you waited in the middle till the next person came, it took you 40 minutes for him to come. This opinion says you would have to repeat, you have to start again from the beginning. If the person came within 40 minutes, that means the delay was not the amount of time that it would have taken to read the Megillah from the beginning to the end. You just continue from where he left off. But if there was a delay, the amount of time that it takes to read the whole Megillah from the beginning to the end, then you have to start again. The same thing by Hallel. How long does it take to recite Hallel? So it seems like the person who was reading the Hallel, who stopped, it would have taken him 7 minutes, 7 minutes, 10, whatever he would have taken to read the Hallel. If in the middle of the recitation of the Hallel there was this delay, they stopped, they waited. If they waited the amount of time that it would have taken him to say the Hallel from the beginning to the end, let's say it's 7 minutes, 8 minutes, let's say 10 minutes, a nice Hallel. If let's say it would have taken him 10 minutes and you delayed 10 minutes, you got to start over again. Okay? So that is what the Gemara says over here. So Jose Rosh, if you waited the amount of time that it would take to recite the whole Hallel or the whole Megillah, if that was the delay, you go back to the beginning. Now look, how much time does it take to blow the shofar from the beginning to the end? Meaning, there's 9 sounds of the shofar. We're talking about a Torah level. We said 3 truot, each truot preceded by tekiah, followed by tekiah. How long does it take to blow tekiah, shvarim truot, tekiah? We do that and then do that 3 or tekiah, truot, tekiah, tekiah, truot, tekiah. A minute, 2 minutes? How long does it take to blow the 9 sounds? So if you delayed those 9, if you delayed in the middle, let's say you're in the middle of blowing, he blew the first set, tekiah, truot, tekiah, and then he was up to it. Then he did the second set, tekiah, truot, tekiah, and then he's up to the third set, and the sound doesn't go. You just can't get it out. And then he waits. He said, I have to wait a minute, 2 minutes. But if he waits too long, or they're trying to find someone else to do it. Say it again. It would seem, according to this opinion, he would have to bless again. We have to look up again. We're going to see more in the halacha. If he didn't, not Yotzei, it would sound like now, unless somehow you say that, meaning if you say he has to start again, it sounds like that the first reading was not a reading. So we'll have to see halacha regarding the bracha. It's a good question. But regarding starting from the beginning, it says you would have to go back to the beginning. So the Gemara says that that's a contradiction to what he said, right? Because he said before that you could even have 9 hours. The blowing of the shofar was over 9 hours. But we're going to see that there's a major machloket between the Sfardim and the Ashkenazim on the halacha, this case, if there was this long delay, because the Shulchan Aruch is going to say, Shulchan Aruch talks about the morning mark.
Morning, Rabbi.
So if we take a look in the Shulchan Aruch, and let's say Siman Samach Hey, we're talking about mark. If someone in the middle of a mitzvah, middle of recitation of the Hallel, or in middle of Megillat Esther, he stops and he delays for a certain amount of time. He delayed for an amount of time that it would have taken him to read the whole Hallel, or the amount of time that it would take him to read the whole Megillat Esther. He would have to go ahead. And one opinion, the Gemara says you'd have to go back. Another opinion says you do not have to go back. So the Shulchan Aruch says, here he talks about the mitzvah of Kriya Shema. He says, regarding the mitzvah of Kriya Shema, someone began to read the Shema. He's in the middle of the Shema. Let's say it's Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. And he says, V'hafta es Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha b'chol nafshecha b'chol madecha. He's in the middle of the Shema, and then he stops. And he delays. And he delayed the amount of time he could have said this, that it would take him to say the Shema from the beginning to the end. So the Shulchan Aruch says, does not have to start again from the beginning. Shulchan Aruch, the Rabbi Yosef Cairo says, he could continue. I mean, the Shulchan Aruch said if he went ahead and he finished, It's interesting the way the Shulchan Aruch says. After the fact, he went ahead and he continued from where he left off, even if he waited the amount of time that it had taken him to say the whole thing, he gets credit. It's interesting that he says that he doesn't say that he
He did
doesn't
the avad. He doesn't have to go back.
B'diavad, right? He says b'diavad, but it's interesting that he says it that way, that he doesn't say that you can finish it that way. But he's the language, the way
So in other
he
words, you shouldn't continue and finish. But if you did, you're there.
that's what it sounds like, the language, but we'll have to see a little bit more about that. But the way the Chafetz Chaim says, Mr. Mark, is that even he holds you don't have to. It sounds like from the Chafetz Chaim that this opinion would hold if even if you catch yourself in your middle of, you do not have to go back to the beginning, and therefore you can actually continue from where you caught yourself.
So how long could you wait then?
No, that's again. Again. You're not supposed to wait. You're not supposed to delay in the middle of the mitzvah. But if you delay in the middle of the mitzvah, even though you delayed the amount of time that it would taken you to say the Hallel,
Okay.
say the Megillah, you could just continue from where you left off. That would seem to be the halacha for the Sfardim. And even if the situation was totally beyond your control, and you were stuck, and you couldn't read because it's not like you had the ability to read and you just didn't, but some sort of ones happened, something that stopped you, prevented you from reading. Still, you are able to continue from where you left off. However, the Ramah, the Ashkenaz rabbi, says that some say that if there was an anus, if you were incapable of reading, the fact that you couldn't, if there was a situation you couldn't read, so that makes the fact that you couldn't do it, that's considered interruption. If you couldn't do it, was over for a longer amount of time to start from the beginning to the end, then you have to repeat from the beginning to the end. That's the opinion for the Ashkenazim. Now, so let's continue in the Gemara. So now the Gemara is discussing this halacha, and the Gemara is saying that we have an apparent contradiction between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yochanan, because in one place he says that if you delayed, you read you blew the shofar over 9 hours. It was a tremendous. That means that you delayed enough time that you could have blown the whole thing, the whole set. You delayed that amount of time in the middle of the blowing. He says you'll get credit, but yet we quoted the case yesterday that if the Gemara says if you delayed that amount of time in the middle of the Hallel or the Megillah, Rabbi Yochanan quoted the name of Shimon Yotzadak that if you delayed in the middle of the mitzvah a certain amount of time, you would have to repeat it. So how could he say when you delayed in the middle of the mitzvah of the shofar? The mitzvah of the shofar was to blow those 9 sounds. The tkiyah with 3 truot with the tkiyah. Right? When you get tkiyah, truot, tkiyah, tkiyah, truot, tkiyah, tkiyah, truot, truot. And in the middle of that set of doing your mitzvah, you went ahead and you stopped because you waited an hour between each blow. It took you 9 hours to blow the 9 sounds. So you definitely waited in the middle of the mitzvah the amount of time that it would have taken you to blow the 9 sounds. And yet, you said you get credit. And here Rabbi Yochanan quoted a rabbi that says you don't get credit. So the Gemara says, that's what we said yesterday. One case, it's his own opinion, and one case, it's the opinion of his rabbi. His own opinion is you do not have to repeat. Even if you delayed a long amount of time, tremendous amount of time in the mitzvah.
So we know eating hamotzi, eating a kazayit, or also matzah, there's a specific time attached to it. Is there a specific time attached to this?
No, very good, very good. So Marcus pointed out there's a difference between a mitzvah that when you have to eat something, So it's not called eating if you don't eat it over a specific time. That's not called, it has to be an eating. So therefore, if you eat a kazayit, if you eat an ounce of bread, more than 9 minutes, or you're supposed to do it, some say 7 minutes. If it's more than 7.5 minutes or whatever the length, whatever, what? Achilat pras, if it's 7.5 minutes, then it's not called you ate. That's not called eating, that you would be obligated to say Birkat HaMazon. It's similarly, it would not be called eating that the court would give a person lashes. Person ate 1 ounce of pork over 9 hours of the day, or even if he eat 1 ounce of pork over, it took him 20 minutes to eat the 1 ounce because they will not give him lashes, because in order to give lashes, it has to be something called an eating, and that's not called a type of eating if you ate it over. Therefore, there's no mitzvah birkat hamazon.
Is there other mitzvot that has time that's not eating? Like if you put your yad on your tefillin and you don't put your rosh on all day, it's like not that does it, because you probably didn't do it till you do both, so that's okay. But is there any other mitzvah that has a time element that you have to do it by?
Okay, first, I want to clarify the case of the tefillin. Really, the tefillin is two different mitzvot. I mean, if a guy only has shel rosh or shel yad,
it's okay.
He put on what he got.
Right.
It seems
like throw that one out. But is there another mitzvah that is time bound?
That has a. I mean, it seems like there's mitzvahs of eating, which has a certain amount of time that you spoke about, and there's mitzvahs. Then there's just the performance of a mitzvah. How long does it take you to perform that mitzvah? How long does it take you to read the Megillah? How long does it take you to go ahead and read Hallel? How long does it take you? They discuss about tefillah. If you stop in the middle of the Amidah, also that the discussion about that. The Chafetz Chaim writes in the Bir Halacha and Stim Samachayim and Aleph. He said, he writes like this: the opinion of the Mechaber of the Shulchan Aruch, which is the opinion of Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, which is about the Shema. So here we have some of the mitzvahs, chock full of mitzvah. If you stop in the middle of the Shema or Birkat Hamazon, so he's adding some to the list. Mark. Shema, Birkat Hamazon, Hallel, Megillah, and then he says, "Hu adin kol brachot." All brachot, besides from Tefillah, besides from Shema Amidah, we're going to see Amidah. Shemona Esrei seems to have certain unique laws, might be different than all these other. He said, if you waited in the middle, the amount of time to finish the whole thing. So it sounds like this, Mark. Right, Mr. Haber. If I'm in the middle of saying a bracha and I stop in the middle, what's called an interruption? Is that called? Can I continue where I'm up to? I say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, and then I stop, and then I say Borei Pri Hadama, or I stop for a minute. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, and then so. I don't have to go back from the beginning, according to the Shulchan Aruch. But by Tefillah, it seems like Tefillah, he says here that we have to see more about it, that Shemona Esrei Amidah, if you stop, I was at a case that a guy was a chazan, and he fainted in the middle of davening. He had a certain medical condition. It was at the college. It was at NYU. And the guy fainted in the middle. So the question is, what do you do? Now the next guy the chazan fainted. So now the question is, what does the next guy do when he's taken over? Now there was an interruption. The guy was on the floor, and the Hatzalah, they called Hatzalah. It was a silent. No, he was doing the chazara. He was doing the chazara, and he fainted. He's on the floor. And some medical help came, and then now the question is about continuing the Amidah. Where do you start from? No, I'm saying everybody was everyone's in the shul listening to the Chazan. So they were done anyway, and then so the way the Shulchan Aruch says, the way the Chafetz Chaim, at least in this opening point. Now, obviously, now the question: how much time was the delay? How much time would have taken him to say the Chazara? Taken him 5 minutes? How much? I don't know. Whatever the time is. It also sounds some way the way the Ramah says. He said we look at how long it would take the person who was doing the reading. Say how long it lets him take him 5 minutes. If the delay was 5 minutes, now if the delay was less than the amount of time to say the whole Amidah from the beginning to the end, then there's no question. He didn't. That's not called a delay that you can't. That you have to start again from the beginning. You would not have to start from the beginning. The question would be if the delay was an amount of time that it would have taken him to start from the beginning of the Amidah to the end. Let's say that. Right. So we're saying if you're in the middle of Sim Shalom, if you delayed the amount of time to say that midah from the beginning to the end, which is 5 minutes, even though he's 4 minutes and 30 seconds into it, he would according to that opinion, you would have to start again from the beginning because that's called a hefsek. That's called an interruption unless somehow we're going to make a difference between the chazan, chazara, and quiet. We have to see more about would we say there's a difference. But here the Chafetz Chaim writes, B'tfilah, it's years ago. What we paskined, I think what they did is the person took over from where he was up to. And the question was that correct or not? That's a different question, But that was, I think, what they did in that case. But from so far from here, now it depends. First, we have to know how long was he? What did he stop? I mean, how long was there a stoppage in the Amidah? Now, the other question also would have to think about is okay. Well, 1 second. But then he says the Yesh Omrim, the second opinion is Tosot and the Rosh, that there is no difference between davening, Amidah, and other matters. Every matter, if he was delayed because of an ones, meaning someone is saying when it comes to Amidah, even if you weren't forced to stop, meaning there's an interesting thing called an ones. If I am forced to do something, if I'm forced to stop, that's called more of an interruption than when I voluntarily stop. When I voluntarily stop, it's not really, there was nothing that pushed me to stop. But if my hand is tied and I can't do it, that's called a ones, and that's considered more of an interruption than when a person voluntarily stops. So the way the Ramah says that if I was forced to stop, that's called I got to go back to the beginning if I delay the amount of time. But if I was not forced to stop, you would have thought the other way, right? Right.
It couldn't help me. I had to stop. If I stop by choice, it should stop from the beginning.
Right. That's what you would have thought. So now I'll read you the Chafetz Chaim. He says like this. What's the logic? If there was nothing that pushed me, nothing that forced my hand, if I wanted to, I could have read, but I just decided I stopped. That's not called an interruption. Even if I would have spoken, I spoke in middle of the Hallel. I spoke in middle of Hallel. I delayed. He stopped, and he started talking in middle of Hallel. So he says. So now people could sleep a little better at night, right? But we don't recommend that. We should not supposed to be talking. Mark is going to make sure nobody talks during Hallel. Not allowed to talk during Hallel, right? You're in the middle of your mitzvah, right? It's one mitzvah called reading Hallel. It's not like I finished one mitzvah, I'm doing another mitzvah, right? You want to talk between putting on your talit and putting on your tefillin. Okay, you put on your talit. Now you want to say good morning to someone. Say good morning. Say hello. Don't ask him about the Yankees, but whatever. So they say, but if you're in the middle of the mitzvah of Hallel, you're not supposed to be talking. But if you did speak, and even he had a conversation, a long conversation in the middle of Hallel, that it was so long that that could have taken me. I could have said the whole Hallel from the beginning to the end. So that is not called an interruption. that you would have to repeat, start from the beginning. But in ones, see, they want it says, but in ones, that's considered that's something that I am stuck. That they want to say is worse. That's called, you know, that's how they're looking at it. That if my hand is tied, that's called an interruption. Good morning. Now comes the, and then he says, the Magen Avram says like this. If let's say the onus was, the person was, what type of onus? He wasn't capable of doing it. He needed the bathroom. He had to go to the bathroom. He had to stop in the middle because he needed to go to the bathroom, or the place where he was at was not clean. I'm stuck. I'm not voluntarily stopping. Something came up that forced my hand. I needed the bathroom, or the place was not clean. But if some other ones, let's say he says something else, he says, it's I willingly stopped, but let's say he gives an example, there was robbers coming, right? So he calls the robbers. I mean, I was capable of saying it, but I just willingly decided that it's not that I had to not say it. It's not that my hand that I was automatically, this is a choice that I made because robbers were coming. He calls it, in this case, right? He says that's not considered an interruption. He says, right, but by Kriya Shema, this is only by Shema and its brachot and similar things. But by Amidah, by the Shemona Esrei, there, the Ashkenaz opinion would be even a different ones, even not only an ones of bathroom or these type of things, even other things which would have to go back to the beginning. That's what it seems like for the Ashkenaz opinion. Now, no, oh right. It has to be an ones. Ashkenaz, it has to be an ones. But if it's right, easier heard of to be ones by Shemona Esrei. But by Shemona Esrei, it seems like there's even the lower level ones would be considered an interruption. That's what I was seeing for the Ashkenazim. Right, but with the Sfardim hold, even if there was a real ones, if you interrupted, it was a real ones, you did not have to go, you did not
explain why for ones you have to go back to the beginning. Which you'd say, oh, for an emergency, okay, I got to stop.
Right. But you understand this logic?
I stopped because I felt like, okay.
Right, because
What?
Right, that's what Mark is saying. You're not guilty. Right.
No, if you're guilty of doing something wrong, then you didn't fulfill your obligation. Start over. If you're guilty of doing, if you're not guilty of doing something wrong, it's honest, it's emergency, then finish where you are.
Right. So
there should be no penalty.
Right. So the answer is, Mark, good point. It's not about penalty. That's the point. You're right.
I'm saying not even penalty. It's not your sin. In other words, what you did so far didn't count. So what you did so far should count.
Right. So we're saying the way the logic seems to me is that when something that if I am stuck, if I can't do something, then means that there's something. It's something that's stopping this. So if there's something that's stopping this, so then that's called a real interruption. There's something that's really stopping it. But if there's nothing really that's really removing, interrupt. It's my will that's interrupting me. That's not called that this thing really was was interrupted. It was just I voluntarily interrupted it. So therefore, we're not going to look at it like I have to go ahead and I have to start again, because it's not it wasn't necessary. When you have to, I'm interrupted now. It's beyond my control. That means I have no. This thing is no more connected to me in a certain sense, because something else took over here. So that seems to be the logic. Again, the Sfardim, the Shulchan Aruch says, they say it doesn't make a difference what the circumstance is. Even if it's a real ones, your hands were tied behind your back, you had to interrupt. You do not have to start again.
No one starts, don't start again.
Even
or not, even if it's longer than it takes to do it.
From the beginning to the end.
Regardless of where you are.
Exactly. That's the Sephardi
Regardless
opinion.
how long.
Right. That's the Sephardi opinion. Right. We'll have to look more in that regarding Shemona Esrei. We'll see a little more about that. But regarding for all those mitzvahs, Hallel, Megillah, Brachot, Shema, Birkat HaMazon, whatever that interruption was, even though he did something wrong, he or she did something wrong by interrupting, but they don't have to start again. It's a nice leniency for the Sephardim, for the Sephardim have.
If someone continue, the beginning for it's lost everything. If you miss bracha,
If you miss a bracha, you have to.
it's lost everything. So the beginning from
So let's
from everything anyway you begin from
yeah, but the question is if you're middle of Bachenu, you're up to Bachenu. But you didn't miss, you went straight. You went straight. I mean, you're talking about the second Chazan. Yeah, but the question is if he was listening to every bracha. Also, he listened, right? So maybe he was listening to every bracha and for the cow. So that's the question. So that will be the question: can he continue? Can the second guy continue from where the first guy left off, or not? Now, also, it might depend if the second guy was listening to the Chazara properly or not. So the case with the Chazara, the guy's fainted case would have to be looked into properly. For the Ashkenaz, also even for the Sephardim would have to be looked into. What will you do in such a? It was right. Ashkenaz, right? We definitely see more about starting from the beginning. At least we see room for that. But again, we have to see more about that. Halacha in practice, what's the right psak? What's the proper halacha to give for such a situation? Now, okay, let's continue in the Gemara. So the Gemara says, depends. One opinion was his own opinion. One opinion was the opinion of his rabbi. His rabbi had the stricter opinion that you have to go back to the beginning. So then the Gemara challenges that. With the day low, what about Rabbi Yochanan himself? He himself did not hold that way. Rabbi Vohu was walking in back of Rabbi Yochanan, which by the way, that's a good thing, to following the rabbi. He was following the rabbi. And Rabbi Vohu was reading the Shema. When he came to a place that was dirty, let's say there was urine there or other things there that were dirty. So that's the case. So that's a real ones, right? This is a case of ones, right? It's not a voluntary stoppage. He had to stop because he can't say the Shema if he's passing through a dirty place. Ishtik. So he was quiet. He waited until he passed the dirty place. And Batad the Khalif, after he passed the dirty place, Amalei, Rabbi Vo said to Rabbi Yochanan, since I delayed in the middle of my Shema, Mahu, Liligmar. Can I continue from where I'm up to? Or do I have to start from the beginning? That's the case, right? The case of ones, the real ones, it was not voluntarily that I stopped. My hands were tied. I had to interrupt. I had to stop. And this is the classic case where we said machlokas Ashkenazim the Sephardim. So he said, Rabbi Yochanan told him, Im she'ita, if you waited the amount of time it would have taken you to say the Shema from the beginning to the end of the Shema, if that was the amount of delay, you have to repeat. You have to start from the beginning That's the Ashkenaz Im Sha'atal K'dei Ligmet Kula Hozel Rosh. You got to go back to the what? To the beginning. So the Gemara says, so we see Rabbi Yochanan himself said that if you delay the amount of time, you have to start again. So how could Rabbi Yochanan say that you have 9 hours to do the mitzvah of blowing 9 sounds? Good morning, Mr. Amos. That means you delayed between sound number 1 and sound number 2. You stopped the amount of time that it'll take you to blow the whole shofar.
Will or 9 versus
Oh, that's a great point. Mark is asking a great point. What's the comparison to maybe those were all voluntarily? Maybe because they were voluntarily, right? But the fact that Yochanan does not make a difference why it take him 9 hours, whether it was voluntarily or not. Maybe you could say it seems to indicate it doesn't make a difference if it was an ones or not an ones. Rabbi Yochanan would say you would not have to. Let's say, right? It's a good point. I like Mark's point. What's the question? Maybe it's a difference. Okay. So the Gemara says, Hachi Kamalei. So the Gemara says no contradiction. Rabbi Yochanan really held, meaning sometimes you ask a question, I'm giving you an answer according to your opinion. Meaning I myself, Rabbi Yochanan holds, there's no issue here. You don't have to repeat. Even though you delayed the amount of time to go from the beginning to the end. But you who hold you who hold differently, you who hold that Rabbi Yochanan even held that you didn't even have to stop in the middle. What we'll see tomorrow, because he says that his opinion, even though we don't hold that way, that since you were only passing by this dirty place, you didn't have to stop. But now you held you have to stop. And now you're asking me the question also to have to begin again. That means you hold that if you would have delayed a certain amount of time, you have to start over again. You're asking, did you delay enough time? So I'm telling you, you want to know about what's called the time of delay? Time is how much time it takes to say from the beginning of the Shema to the end of the Shema. But I hold it doesn't make a difference how much time you delay. Even if you delayed it for a long time, you will not have to go ahead. Even if they delayed an hour, you won't have to start again. I want to wish everyone will continue tomorrow. Very fascinating discussion today we got into. You're welcome. Thank you. Have a great day, everybody. You're going to be going away, Mark?
You're invited? Wow. Okay. I was way 5 times the last one. Are you serious? Where? I went to Florida for my brother David. I went to Dallas once, Florida twice. Wow. Sounds like you're having a good month. That sounds great. No excuses for that. Take advantage of it.